Hello everyone, and welcome back to Replay, the show where games are art. We're back with more Final Fantasy VI, and today we're heading into one of my favorite parts of the game, the belly of the sandworm. Let me just get my party together and kit it out. Terra and Realm, of course, because Terra and Realm. Mog in case I get sick of encounters, and let's say Sabin to be our brawler healer this time. Now, we've talked before about the descent into the underworld, and the descent into the belly of the beast is pretty much the same thing. You have to die to be reborn. You have to descend into the deepest darkness to be transformed. So, we let ourselves be devoured. It's a brilliant inversion of game logic. Past Final Fantasies have had monsters that devour your party members one by one, such as the Doom Wall in Final Fantasy IV, or Atmos in Final Fantasy V, but in those the goal was always not to be eaten, which just generally seems like a good plan. But if we're seeking transformation, down into the darkness we must go and get eaten deliberately to find, actually, one of the most interesting dungeons in the game. I don't think any Final Fantasy before this had a dungeon with quite this many moving parts. It's not actually very many rooms, but each of them presents a unique timing-based puzzle to get through, which is both very clever and utterly fascinating, seeing as we are presumably in the belly of a monster. First is these men rushing back and forth, pushing us off the conveyor belts. You actually want it to happen at least once, so you can get at the treasure below, but after that it's all about jumping back and forth to avoid them. Way back on the Phantom Train, I brought up that the game's developers had originally planned a whole series of side quests involving an imperfect impersonator. Siegfried on the Phantom Train is a relic of that plotline, as is Garrod, though that was changed to make him actually be Edgar in a bad disguise. It would have culminated in finding the impersonator Go-Go here. This would have been a huge change from Go-Go's prior appearance in Final Fantasy V, where they were basically just some rando who showed up and made you go through a timed dungeon to get the Mimic class. If Final Fantasy VI had stuck with that plan, Go-Go would have still been a side character, but one with a noticeable story role. Go-Go is still worth talking about, however, because even without that story presence, they tie together two of the game's most important themes. First is the theme of transformation. It's no accident that the two characters most frequently called on to represent the game, for example in box art, are Terra and Mog. One's special power is to transform herself, the other transforms the world around him. The transformation of the world is exactly what the Returners sought, what Kefka hijacked, and what we are now seeking to achieve. So many of our characters are people living at points of crisis, people who are one thing in the process of becoming another. And again, this is a change from past Final Fantasies. Occasionally, characters would be in the process of becoming. Rydia, Edge, Kain, Kryl. But for the most part, in Final Fantasy as a whole, character development occurs mostly through uncovering backstory, not in watching the characters transform as people. Characters like Bartz, Cloud, Cecil, or Zidane already are something, they just don't yet know what it is. And other characters like Faris, Yang, Tifa, or Selphie remain pretty much entirely static. This doesn't make them necessarily bad characters. Faris is an absolute delight, especially in the GBA translation of FF5. I'm just making the point that FF6 is unusual in this respect. Ah, and here's the second room, a ceiling that slams down, but there are save areas you can wait in. Again, it's all about timing and position. that respect, it's a little like the two battles in the World of Balance where we had to split the party into 3 and defend someone. As I was saying, almost every member of the cast undergoes a transformation over the course of the story, which they'll illustrate in the final confrontation with Kefka. For some, like Locke, Cyan, and the Figaro twins, it's learning to let go of the past and move on. For others, like Terra and Gao, it's about outsiders learning to connect with other people. And for still others, like Celeste and Setzer, it's about standing up for what they believe in and no longer letting themselves be carried along by chance or the powerful social forces around them. This game has a very unusual position among Final Fantasies. Most are, to some degree, about recovering lost pasts, ancient relics and forgotten backstories. And to an extent, insofar as it's about recovering Terra's backstory and learning about the War of the Magi and Goddesses, the first half of Final Fantasy VI is too. But then Kefka steals away the future, and the World of Balance becomes about taking it back. The second theme Go-Go reflects, appropriately enough, is that of mirrors and duality. Where Terra is the poster child for transformation, Celeste is all about reflections and doubles, from her ice powers to a role as Terra's opposite number, to that whole Maria thing. Throughout the game, characters mirror and repeat other characters. We've talked about Celeste and Terra in past episodes, but what about Cyan and Locke? Both driven by survivor's guilt and personal loss. One, the perfect honorable knight, who lies and deceives that girl for Miranda. The other, the sneaky thief, who fights fiercely for what's right. There's Gao, the human trained by monsters, and Umaro, the monster tamed by humans. And a Moogle. Setzer and Edgar, dashing ladies' men who trusted their lives to the flip of a coin and live on the cutting edge of technology. Go-Go brings both these themes together. They are amorphous, identityless, a creature in perpetual flux who thus can serve as anyone's mirror. In an homage to their Final Fantasy V origins, they can equip any skill of any character, from Sabin's blitzes to Strago's lore. And in being the mirror of everyone in the party, they become the mirror of none of them, but instead of someone else. Go-Go is Kefka's mirror. It's obvious when you think about it. One's a mime, the other's a clown. Both are creatures of chaos, ever fluxing, ever changing. Both sit in the heart of a realm of decay. But Kefka is destruction qua destruction, destruction without end. Go-Go is chaos with purpose, decay that brings forth life. The alchemists of old spoke of a process they called putrefaction. It is death itself, the force of decay, the breaking down of life and beauty into horror and disgust. But unlike simple destruction, putrefaction is part of a process, indeed the beginning of a process. Putrefaction isn't just a piece of fruit that, left out too long, turns moldy and rots away. It's the maggots that emerge in that fruit, the flies they become, and ultimately the birds who eat those flies. It's the soil that rotting fruit enriches and the flowers that grow in that soil. It is not just death, but life from death. The death that brings rebirth. That's what we descend into the belly of the beast for. Go-Go is what we bring back. Problem with the apocalypse wasn't that it destroyed everything. The Empire needed destroying. The problem is that Kefka is standing in the way of rebirth. Before we can remove him, however, there's one last major subquest and a few minor oddities. Start by heading to Thamasa. Or fighting Doomgaze, that's good too. And you know what? I'm pulling out the heavy guns. Terra's patent Ultima Quick Ultima Ultima combo. I think I've fought it before, but just in case I haven't, Doomgaze is a random encounter you only meet in the air, in the world of ruin. He uses a lot of death spells and likes to run away after a while, and any damage you do to it is carried over to the next time you fight it. Now that I have stuff like Ultima, the Gem Box, Bum Rush, and the Proto-Mega Moogle, I'm pretty confident I can take it on this run. Especially since I lucked out and my whole party is immune to level 5 Doom, which is always its opening move and can really change the shape of the battle. Or I'm killing him with the first Ultima. Okay. And I guess Mog's just up there somewhere? Anyway, the reward for killing Doomgaze is the Bahamut Magicite, which is pretty sweet. It lets you summon Bahamut, obviously, plus it teaches Flare, which is traditionally the best single-target magic attack in the series, though seeing as we already have Ultima, it's mostly superfluous at this point. Anyway, onward to Thamasa. My party for this has to have Strago in it, so I'm swapping out Sabin for him. It makes my party a bit unbalanced in favor of magic, but then the game is unbalanced in favor of magic, so it's no biggie. Once in Thamasa with Strago and Realm, we learned that Strago's old friend Gung-Ho has been injured. Gung-Ho has not appeared prior to this, presumably because he was off on the adventure where he got injured. But apparently he and Strago are old friends who travel together in search of rare monsters, and their great regret is that they never found Hydon. Well, now Gung-Ho has found his lair, but is claiming to be too injured to get on with it. So, of course, we're off to find it and learn Strago's best attack lore, Grand Train. Which is, a less effective Ultima, basically? One of the weird things about FF6 is that, for a game where magic in general is incredibly powerful, lores aren't. In FF5, which if I recall correctly was the first place blue mages appeared, they were a great way to get an interesting and varied set of moves. Skills like White Wind and Mighty Guard, if you could find them, made blue mages, frankly, better at healing and defense than white mages. The problem is that in FF5, anybody could learn anything. You could equip a single character with the abilities to control enemies and learn blue magic, and have them do that while other characters built up other skills. Not only that, but any blue magic spell learned by any character was learned by every character, so you could have a whole party controlling enemies cast useful blue magic on themselves, and thereby learn it all quite quickly. That's not how it works in FF6. In FF6, only Realm can control enemies, and then only with a specific relic, while only Strago can learn lores. Couple that with other types of magic being easier to get and more effective, and lores just aren't as good as FF5's blue magic or FF7's enemy skills materia. One of a very, very small number of ways FF7 did something better than FF6. On the other hand, you can see why they did it this way. It makes a lot of sense, first, that Realm and Strago work best as a team. They're not just family, but close family. It's kind of cool that they complement one another. The same can be said in the early game about Edgar and Sabin, since at least initially, Edgar is good at clearing large groups of weak enemies, and Sabin at killing single strong enemies. But this fades in mid-game as Edgar gets tools like the drill and chainsaw, and Sabin gets blitzes like Fire Dance and Airblade. And of course all of that ceases completely to matter in late game, because all that matters in late game are magic and clever relic combos. It also makes sense that Realm, who is very good at playing the charming and innocent child to get what she wants, can manipulate monsters into doing her bidding. Look at her first battle against Ultros. That's pretty much what she's doing there. Strago, meanwhile, is the fusty old sage, so of course he gains his magic by studying what the monsters do. So anyway, as you can see, the actual dungeon is a random teleporter maze. Every treasure chest gives some number of pieces of coral, and when you gather enough, you can feed them to the one talking chest, and it'll move aside. It's all pretty much a reference to the Titan in FF1, who would demand to be fed a ruby, and if you did, open the path to the outer world beyond the first continent. What I can't remember is if you have to feed the chest X coral in total, or X coral at once. I'm a little worried it's the latter, which will make this dungeon much more obnoxious. The enemies here are all either aquatic or undead, which kind of makes sense. Junko said this rock used to be underwater, and so it's kind of another descent into the belly of the beast. Or, as it's also called, the belly of the whale, referencing the story of Jonah. Water and death are appropriate here, deep water being another place you find absolute darkness. Oh, wow, and while I was talking, they massacred my party. Mog is getting closer and closer to being Mega Moogle, and that means I need to watch out if he gets confused. Okay, I've finally got enough coral to satisfy that asshole chest, and I can confront Hydon! The main challenge here, giving my party's abilities to just pump out the Ultimas, is going to be not killing him before he can cast Grand Train. Strago needs to be hit by it at least once. Unfortunately, Hydon won't even start casting it until all the little dudes are dead. So my strategy here is going to be pretty standard boss battles. Start by getting life 3 on everyone. Strago, since he doesn't have much in the way of attack spells, will be on healing duty. Oh, they're really pounding on Strago. I don't know if that's bad luck or deliberate programming, but just in case, I'm going to beef up his defenses a bit. And the Mega Moogle's a zombie. Well, that's easy enough to fix. Ugh, this is not going well. I've barely had a chance to attack. Okay, good. The little dudes are dead. That should cut down how quickly it can attack me. And there's Grand Train. Time for murder. Double Ultima. I freaking love Terra with the gem box. And it's Mega Moogle for the kill! Too bad I didn't actually get off the double Ultima, but there'll be plenty more chances. Thankfully, this is another one of those dungeons that you leave instantly once you beat the boss, seeing as there's no other way out. So now let's talk a bit about this. Gung-Ho shows up out of nowhere, tricks Strago into taking out Hydon, allowing Strago to hit his peak potential. There's two things going on here. One is that Gung-Ho is fulfilling his role as Strago's rival, yet another kind of doubling. A rival is a kind of secondary character who exists to advance a main character. They could be friends or bitter enemies, but they are always in some form of competition. The key is that the rival pushes the main character to be their best self. That's what's happened here. When we first meet Strago, he was a typical Thamasin. Unwilling to help us, set in his ways, cut off from the outside world. We roused him out of that by rescuing Realm and bringing him to meet Espers, but he fell back into passivity when the world seemed to be ended. Realm helped break him out of that, but defeating Hydon pushed him to his peak potential, the ultimate attack lore. That's Gung-Ho's doing. Now, it may be a coincidence, since Gung-Ho is his Japanese name, and the Chinese phrase from which the English term Gung-Ho derives means something completely unrelated. But if Gung-Ho is a reference to the English term, that's exactly the purpose he served. He's gotten Strago fired up, back to his old Gung-Ho attitude. And with that, there is basically nothing left between us and Kefka's Tower except grinding and maybe one or two little scenes. So, I'll see you all next time. Bye!